welcome everyone. We're coming to you from the cliffs above Golden Cove on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. So I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. As chair of the American Bar Association's Civil Rights and Social Justice section, I have the pleasure today of bestowing this Father F. Drinan Award for Distinguished Service to Jerry Gardner. Father Robert Drinan was a founding member of the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, served as its chair in 1990 to 91, and its delegate in 1993 to 1996. He was widely known and revered throughout the ABA for his long-standing service to the bar in many capacities. I didn't have the chance to personally know Father Drinan. However, when I hear him described, it is always with a reverence for the way he brought people together and zealously advocated in a way that unified rather than divided people. The Civil Rights and Social Justice section website describes the qualifications for the Father Drinan awardee. Nominees for the award must have sustained commitment to and advanced the section's mission of providing leadership to the legal profession in protecting and advancing human rights, civil liberties, and social justice. So when I thought about who should receive the Father Drinan Award this year, I thought about who I had worked with during my tenure with CRSJ that most embodied the qualities of Father Drinan and had demonstrated that important commitment to the work of this section. That contemplation brought me back to my first council meeting where Jerry passed out light-up pens to everyone and placed dancing stuffed animals at the four corners of the large council table. I remember thinking, what is going on? Jerry was smiling and telling jokes to what was normally a rather somber group, and everyone's faces were lighting up. I could tell he was greatly loved and appreciated by all who knew him. Then, during the meeting, Jerry brought up some very important issues and advocated for a specific approach we should take to realize our interests. I noticed that everyone listened to him. He was deeply involved in the work of our Native American Concerns Committee, and I soon realized how active that committee was within our section, always with Jerry gently but relentlessly guiding its work. Last year, when I was chair-elect, our then chair, Angela Scott, made Jerry a special counsel for our section. I watched Jerry fulfill that role with exemplary dedication and began to understand the breadth of his experience as well as his in-depth knowledge of the ABA and outside partner entities. Jerry has more than 40 years of experience working with American, Indian, Alaska Native nations, tribal court systems, and victims of crime in Indian country. Jerry, a descendant of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, has served as the executive director of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, TLPI, since its founding in 1996. That organization just celebrated its 25th anniversary, and I'm pleased that we can follow that distinction with this award to its executive director this year. Jerry has served as an adjunct professor at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, UCLA School of Law, and Southwestern School of Law. He previously served as the administrator for the National American Indian Court Judges Association. He has been an appellate court judge for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, North Dakota, and Porch Creek Band, Alabama. He served as the senior staff attorney with the National Indian Justice Center, NIJC, from NIJC's establishment in 1983 until TLPI's founding in 1996. He served as a professional staff member at the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs from 1978 to 1979. He also served in legal training positions for the National Office of the Legal Services Corporation from 1979 to 1981, and for the American Indian Lawyer Training Program from 1981 to 1983. For our section, Jerry has served for almost 2 decades. He served 2 terms on our council, continuously co-chaired our Native American Concerns Committee, and served as special counsel for 2 terms. He also served in the ABA House of Delegates, representing the National Native American Bar Association, and has worked closely with the ABA Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. When Jerry commits himself to something, he does it all the way. I don't think anything exemplifies that more than the fact that he and his husband Lou, who is here with us today, have been together for over 30 years. Jerry will be our first Native American Father Drinan Award recipient, and I'm so happy that I get to bestow this award to him. When I think of those qualities of Father Drinan, how he brought people together and zealously advocated in a way that unified rather than divided people, I think of Jerry. I want to thank you, Jerry, for always being there as a tireless advocate, but one who uplifts and supports us all as we continue to blaze a trail for human rights and social justice. There is no doubt that Jerry is a lion among advocates, and no introduction would be complete without the appropriate commencement to this celebration. So before we call up the rest of the people here to honor Jerry today, let's kick off this celebration Jerry style.
Jerry, there are so many ways in which you are deserving of this award. Everyone who knows you, even just in passing, knows that you have an amazing ability to bring light where there is darkness. In the work that we do, we are often faced with grief, and in these situations, you can consistently demonstrate how resiliency through humor lifts everyone up. Your generosity is unlike anyone I have ever known. In your leadership at TLPI, you have taken it upon yourself to care for each and every staff member. In fact, I have often wanted to ask you to dress as Santa for our annual Christmas party, but it always just seems redundant. You often use a somewhat self-deprecating phrase as the closing in your emails, relentlessly yours. But the truth is, you are absolutely relentless. Relentless in your support for tribal sovereignty, for victims of crime, and for Indian country generally. Your multiple decades of tireless work is an inspiration to so many, including me. And your singular focus on lifting up tribal communities, no matter the obstacles, is truly relentless in the best possible way. No one is more deserving of accolades, Jerry. Congratulations.
Jerry, huge congratulations to you as your tenacity, love, and fervor for social justice are recognized by the section today. When reading about Father Drinan and the origination of this award, I cannot help but think that this award was created to recognize individuals just like you. It is noted that Father Drinan was, quote, at once a teacher, scholar, and advocate of the section mission to protect and advance human rights, civil liberties, and social justice. I get to see you be each of those, a teacher, a scholar, and an advocate, almost on a daily basis. And I feel humbled to work alongside you at TLPI and in the section. In addition to being all those things, you're also a fantastic mentor. I personally have you to thank for my involvement in the ABA and the section, and I believe others can say the same. You have shown me how vital it is to utilize our voice as members of the legal profession, to invoke the privilege and power that comes with being an attorney, and channel that towards efforts for the greater good, all while centering tribal nations and recognizing sovereignty. I'm so glad that I took that internship with TLPI way back in undergrad, as it has led me here to express my thanks to you, congratulate you on this honor, and to continue to work with you for the benefit of others. I look forward to continuing to learn from you and grow with you. Ahiahe kundak, thank you.
Congratulations, Jerry, for being the first Indigenous person to receive the Father Drinan Award. As mentioned earlier, Jerry is a former congressional staffer and served on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. And if you know Jerry, you know that his Senate experience provided him with numerous political puns and funny staffer stories. One of my favorite stories involves many staffers sharing one tie in the office that they used to talk to the senator whenever they got called in his office. I'll spare you the details of all of the antics, but it's just one example of how Jerry incorporates humor in all situations. I worked at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute early in my professional career. Jerry taught me how to tactfully work, which comes in handy in my current job working as a staff director for the United States House of Representatives. I tactfully negotiated legislative language to include Native American women in the Violence Against Women Act. Through my work at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, led by Jerry, I provided firsthand experience to other congressional staffers to make the case of why these critical changes needed to be made in legislative text. Jerry worked his entire career in many different areas of the law to ensure that tribes are respected and the voices of survivors can be heard. He has created a fantastic organization that goes above and beyond to ensure that tribes are advocated for and tribal judicial systems deserve respect that they need among other systems in this country. In meetings with folks not familiar with tribes, he is the bridge that connects us as humans and as advocates. He has the biggest heart and the best humor. In the most stressful situations and moments, he takes it upon himself to make his staff feel appreciated. He quickly found out that if you feed me pizza, I will work for however long you want me to. Jerry is one of a kind, and I'm so proud to be here with all of you to celebrate him and give him the proper recognition he deserves. Congratulations, Jerry, and thank you to the American Bar Association for bestowing this honor upon our most sincere treasure.
Congratulations, Jerry, on winning the Father Drinan Award. We're so proud of you.
Thank you so much.
Jerry, we have one last thing for you. The members of the Native American Concerns Committee wanted to honor you in a special way by giving you and wrapping you in a Native American spirit blanket. This vibrant blanket design is based on a painting by two-spirit artist Ryan Young of the Lac du Flambeau Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa. This blanket calls out to their community the traditional story about crows. I think it's especially fitting to give this particular blanket to you here, since this is the home of many crows on the peninsula. The story goes that the crow was once a very beautiful, colorful bird and had a beautiful singing voice. But in the midst of a forest fire, the crow spent so much time helping the other animals to escape from the fire that his feathers got blackened with soot and his voice became hoarse. To Ryan, the artist, the story reflects the struggles and sacrifices that they have made as two-spirit people to get where they are today and all they have worked through to get to a place where they want to teach others. While this blanket celebrates the two-spirit people, the artist envisions it as a blanket that anyone can wrap themselves in to feel safe, warm, and at home. Jerry, I know that the two Heathers want to symbolically wrap you in it now, and I hope that you will feel the love, safety, and warmth coming from all of us, and that you'll feel that forevermore.
Thank you, Beth, for your generous words and your support and friendship. Thank you to Heather VF, as we say, Heather VF, Heather T, and Naomi for your kind words and great assistance over many years. Thank you to the ABA section on civil rights and social justice for this incredible honor. Like Beth, I never had a chance to meet Father Drinan. I'm familiar with his sustained and extraordinary commitment to protecting and advancing human rights, civil liberties, social justice, and it's a great honor to receive an award named after such an esteemed person. I'm also familiar with many of the 21 eminent people who have previously received this award, including distinguished section chairs like Miles Link, Steve Vermeil, Rob Weiner, and Elysia Frazier, and distinguished section delegates such as Walter White, Estelle Rogers, and Mark Agrast. It is an extreme honor to be included in the company of such respected leaders in the legal profession who have devoted their lives to advancing justice. On a personal level, both as a gay man and as a Native person with more than 40 years working in Indian country, I have seen what can happen when civil rights and human rights are not adequately protected and advanced. I've seen firsthand the important role that this section has served over the years in advancing human rights and civil rights, including LGBTQ rights and the rights of Native peoples. This section and the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, or SOGI Committee, was a leader in advancing LGBT rights long before the establishment of the SOGI Commission. An initial anti-discrimination resolution was defeated twice in the ABA House of Delegates before it was finally adopted in 1989. That victory proved to be a watershed moment, laying the foundation for a series of ABA resolutions over the next 3 decades, which in turn were implemented through congressional testimony and amicus briefs on such matters as adoption, child custody, discrimination in the military, judicial bias, and ultimately marriage equality. Over the last 20 years, this section has become a leader in advancing the rights of American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and peoples. In the 20 years from 1980 to 2000, there were only 4 Native-specific resolutions adopted by the ABA House of Delegates. But in the 20 years in the 20 years since, from 2001 to 2021, there were 25 Native American-specific resolutions that were adopted by the ABA House of Delegates, including, in one of them, the ABA actually adopted as policy this entire book. Though they told us we could not do that again. And there's been multiple well-received Native American-specific programs and events presented, including 2 virtual plays, The Sliver of a Full Moon in November of 2020, and Fairly Traceable in November of 2021. This section has been the lead sponsor for most of these 25 Native-specific programs, or Native-specific resolutions, and the events and programs. And for every one of the programs in which this section wasn't the lead sponsor, it was a co-sponsor for every one of those events. And I also should say that I'm gratified to see that the number of active Native American and Alaska Native ABA members and section members of this section has greatly increased over the past 15 to 20 years. There are many people that I need to thank, but in the interest of time, I'll keep it relatively short. Thanks to Paul Igasaki for initially coercing me into joining the ABA. And thanks to the initial Native American ABA members for serving as beacons and mentors to those of us who joined later, including Kurt Kickenberg, who was the first Native ABA section chair and was chair of this section, Lawrence Baca, who was the first Native recipient of this section's Thurgood Marshall Award, and most especially Mary Smith, who was the first Native officer of the ABA, thanks to Wendy Mariner, Angela Scott, and Beth Whittenbury for giving me the opportunity to serve as special counsel for this section. Thanks, of course, to the section staff, including Paula and Ali and Rushika, for whom none of this would be possible without the incredible section staff. Thanks to the National Native American Bar Association, or NANABA, for giving me the opportunity to serve as NANABA delegate to the ABA House of Delegates. Thanks to the board and staff of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute for supporting my involvement with the ABA, and especially with this section, and especially those TLPI staff members, including Lauren Van Schilfgaard, Corey Cordero, and Heather Torres, who have been very actively involved with this section and who did a lot of the work that I get credit for. Thanks to my husband, Lou, whose love and support has been constant in my life throughout our now 43 years together. It is important for all of us to have a sustained and even a relentless commitment to this section's mission of providing leadership to the legal profession in protecting and advancing human rights, civil liberties, and social justice. I'd like to briefly describe 3 examples of how sustained commitment can in time bring about real change. First, as a gay man born in the mid-1950s, I've seen how crucial the efforts to protect and advance civil and human rights have been in successfully transforming over the course of just a few decades the way our legal system treats the LGBTQ community from a time in which our existence was criminalized. And the impact of the HIV/AIDS pandemic was largely ignored to a time where marriage equality is enshrined in our legal system. It sometimes seems difficult, even for those of us who lived through it, to remember just how bleak things were for LGBTQ rights in the mid to late 1980s, when the majority of our gay friends in San Francisco were dying from a disease that the president refused to even say in public. There was no effective treatment, inadequate research funding, and AIDS diagnosis was essentially a death sentence. Gay men were shunned, and there was even talk of quarantining gay men to protect the rest of the country from us. Virtually every election at that period to overturn LGBTQ rights, anti-discrimination laws, was successful, often by huge majorities. The minimal initial steps like domestic partnership was blocked or vetoed, even in places like San Francisco. And in June 1986, the U.S. Supreme Court's 5-4 decision upholding the Georgia sodomy statute in Bowers versus Hardwick allowed the continued criminalization of our very existence. It took 17 long years of sustained commitment before that outrageous Supreme Court decision was finally overturned by the Supreme Court in 2003 by the Lawrence versus Texas decision. It was, however, even that took 17 years to overturn just that one decision, but in the 12 years following, it only took 12 more years for the 2015 Obergefell decision, which held that there is a fundamental right to marry, and that's guaranteed to same-sex couples under the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment. The second example I want to describe is I had the privilege of working with Browning Pipestem on an Indian law clinic in 1978 while at Antioch Law School. I always remember when Browning told us, Margaret Oberly Kelly and I, that when he was admitted to the Oklahoma bar in 1968, he was one of only six Native American attorneys that he knew of in the entire United States. Thankfully today, after decades of sustained commitment by many people and organizations, there are now hundreds of Native attorneys, including the fact that we now have more than 6 Native attorneys just on the tribal law and policy staff alone. We actually have 9 at the moment. And I'd also point out that Browning Pipestem's son, Wilson, is a partner with lawyer playwright Mary Catherine Nagel in Pipestem and Nagel, a nationally recognized law firm dedicated to protecting and enhancing the sovereign rights of tribal governments and improving the lives of Native people. There is, however, much that still needs to be done. Native Americans are still the smallest racial or ethnic group among U.S. lawyers. Roughly 1/2% of all lawyers, or 0.4% are Native American, whereas the U.S. population is 1.3% Native American. In my work in Indian country over the past 4 decades, I've seen what can happen when the civil and human rights of American Indian and Alaska Native people are ignored, resulting in Native children taken from their communities, cultural and religious freedoms impinged, an epidemic of violence against Native women, and countless other atrocities. Despite these challenges, tribal communities remain resilient and the inherent strengths found in culture, community, tradition abound in Indian country. While so many more American Indian and Alaska Native lawyers, with so many more Native American and Alaska Native lawyers working in tribal communities, advancing and human rights has the added dimension of supporting and uplifting tribal sovereignty and respecting tribal driven approaches to advancing rights. This approach is essential, as demonstrated by what I want to use as the third example of how sustained commitment can in time bring about real change. And that is the long-term fight to restore the inherent tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. It is hard to overstate the problems that were created by Oliphant versus Suquamish in the India tribe, a 1978 U.S. Supreme Court decision that stripped Indian nations of their ability to exercise their inherent criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians who come onto tribal lands and commit crimes. One of the major problems that the Oliphant decision left American Indian and Alaska Native women and children at a higher risk of abuse, murder, and sexual assault, higher than any other population in the U.S. Statistics gathered by the U.S. Department of Justice and tribal governments demonstrate that non-Indians commit a majority of these violent crimes. Oliphant also, of course, led to the current epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We were repeatedly told over the course of the decades following the 1978 Oliphant decision that there was just no way that Congress would have the political will to restore inherent tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. And we were just going to have to live with it. Even when Congress in 2010 passed the Comprehensive Tribal Law and Order Act, there were no provisions directly addressing the overwhelming need to restore inherent tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. The issue was instead punted to the Indian Law and Order Commission, which did this report, for them to study it. John Hart, from the Senate committee, one of the primary architects of the Tribal Law and Order Act, coined the phrase "addressing the elephant in the room" to describe the unwillingness of Congress to even discuss the seemingly intractable issue of overturning the Oliphant decision. But Native advocates, especially American Indian and Native and Alaska Native women, persisted. It was especially important that many Native women were willing to publicly share their very personal and very painful stories in the fight for the restoration of tribal jurisdiction over non-Indians. Many of these stories are celebrated in the play Sliver of a Full Moon, which was provided virtually in November of 2020 by this section. Finally, in 2013, the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, included the landmark Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction, SDVCJ, provision which created a framework for tribal prosecutions of non-Indians for the first time since the 1978 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Oliphant. Unfortunately, in order to get it through Congress, it was very limited initial jurisdiction and much more complicated than was initially realized. That many of us had advocated that the complete Oliphant fix would have only taken changing one word in the Indian Civil Rights Act. That would have been much simpler, but it was amazing to finally be able to address the elephant in the room. In the words of survivor Lisa Bruner, the partial restoration of tribal jurisdiction in VAWA 2013 is just a sliver of the full moon we need to ensure all of our women are safe. Until all our tribe's jurisdiction is fully restored, no one is safe. Thankfully now, the current bipartisan VAWA reauthorization efforts include provisions that would significantly expand the initial special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction by adding additional categories of criminal conduct where tribes would have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. I'm very pleased to recognize that this section, in conjunction with others in the ABA, including the Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence, has fully supported these efforts every step of the way over the course of the last 15 years to restore inherent tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. This section sponsored or co-sponsored multiple relevant ABA resolutions and letters in support of the Tribal Law and Order Act, the tribal provisions of VAWA 2013, the recommendations of the Indian Law and Order Commission, efforts to address the crisis in missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the current advocacy underway to strengthen the tribal jurisdiction provisions in the current VAWA reauthorization. The most recent resolution, ABA resolution on this, Resolution 116, in mid-year 2020, made clear that the ABA recognizes the inherent authority of American Indian and Alaska Native governments to prosecute non-Indian perpetrators of crimes. Each of these three examples clearly demonstrate that progress is possible and that things do change if we all have a sustained and even relentless commitment to this section's mission of providing leadership to the legal profession in protecting and advancing human rights, civil liberties, and social justice. Of course, in each of these instances, there is still much more that still needs to be done. In closing, I'd like to thank the leaders of the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, past and present, and the many other ABA leaders who have stood with us in our ongoing struggles for justice and dignity for all.
So we just wanted to let you know that we were undaunted in giving this award to Jerry today. We're filming outdoors in a public park due to COVID. This morning I woke up to the sound of a lot of rain on the roof, and we managed to find a time when it didn't rain, but that wasn't all. So we do it no matter rain, sleet, hail, COVID, or yes, a tsunami warning, which we had this morning. So if you heard voices behind us, people in the park, it is a public park, and everyone was here to honor Jerry and stop to honor Jerry if they weren't here for it in the first place. So thank you for dealing with all of those things and for honoring Jerry with us. So collectively, Jerry and I would like to invite you to our spring meeting, which if you think this backdrop is beautiful, please know our spring meeting will be held just a few miles down the coast here in beautiful San Pedro, California. So we're hoping that this inspires you to come out and see us and partake in all the wonderful activities and all of the interaction that we're going to have with our constituents during that meeting.
We're very much looking forward to it.
Thank you.